So we've got James's new to him E46 Touring with a 330 6-speed swap in the shop. Initial complaint is that it overheated on the previous owner, and he bought it with some sort of cooling system issue. So this is our first inspection of the car, going over what we find with it just from the initial look over, and what we're going to suggest to James moving forward. So James and I have already looked at the car a little bit, so we have a little bit of understanding of what I'm going to see under the hood here. And we're going to start with this strut tower. E46s will sometimes have hard suspension hits, and they will tear the strut tower right there. And that is from the strut tower here separating from the apron and everything like that. On this car, it's not the worst I've ever seen, but it's certainly not great. This you can see that there's, you can see that the edge here kind of has an inward angle, whereas generally they're 90 degrees. We can also see that the bolts on the fender here have moved around a little bit. There's some damage to the opening here, but that may have been from somebody doing an alignment previously. But generally, I would expect this strut tower to have been mushroomed up, and it may have needed to be hammered flat, and that could have been some of the damage there. But his complaint is that the car is losing coolant and it's overheating, and when he brought it up, we could hear the car hissing. And looking through right behind the oil filter housing, you're probably not going to be able to see it, but there's coolant pooled up, and that is because the coolant pipes, these plastic ones under the intake manifold, are leaking and causing that problem. Hopefully they're just leaking because they're old and not because there is a head gasket issue with the engine, but we won't really know that until we get everything together at this point. The car seems to run fine otherwise, the fact that it leaks coolant. Above the hood here, I don't really see anything else that looks too concerning. So at this point, we're going to move to the bottom side. So underneath the car now, James has not been under the car, so this is all going to be new for him as well. But we have seen a little bit. The car has an MTEC 2 front bumper on it already. One thing that was not done is the MTEC 2 air dam, radiator inlet duct, whatever you want to call it, was not swapped over. So you can still see that it doesn't have the right one on there. This splash shield is missing. This one is in place, but these are the original non-MTEC 2 bumper splash shields, along with the brake ducts. As you can see through the opening here, the brake duct is right there. On this side, it's actually partially missing. So those will need to be addressed by James if he wants to finish up the MTEC 2 conversion in the front end. We do have some wiring that is tore up here. That looks like that is probably going to be for the heated washer jets outside temp sensor. The outside temp sensor for the instrument cluster ambient temp is this one right here, and it is in place. But you can see the gap between the splash shield and the bumper is not correct because these are the wrong lower splash shields for this car. So going around, I don't really see anything else too terrible. We have aftermarket sway bar on it. It's got a little bit of oil leakage, and it's hard to say exactly where that's coming from. Maybe from the oil pan gasket. It certainly has been replaced before, as evidenced by that orange RTV that's on it. It does look like maybe the oil filter housing gasket is seeping a little bit. We can see these trails of liquid right here. That's coolant that's run down and left those stains. We can see more of it back here on the back of the oil pan. So that'll all be addressed with the heater pipes. Coming back, a little bit of oil residue on the back here. Nothing we're too terribly concerned about at this point. The car is missing the front splash shield and then the reinforcement plate. The control arms and at least the tie rods have been replaced, the inner and outer. It does have a ZHP style yellow tag rack on it, so maybe the rack's been replaced as well. Well, the rack has been replaced. It's not original to this car, but maybe it's been rebuilt or something like that. It has ground control coilover kit on it. It does not have any strut tower reinforcements, so we are going to add that in as well. Brake lines have been replaced. They look all good. I believe this thing has 330 front brake calipers and rotors on it, as they look like they are sticking down further than the stock dust shields. So I imagine it has the brake upgrade to go with the engine. 6-speed transmission, looks like it's in good shape. O2 sensor wiring is routed incorrectly. We'll decide if that's something that we need to take care of in the future, but it looks like it's at least not sitting on the exhaust at this point. Engine mounts, or excuse me, the transmission mounts and the engine mounts have been replaced. The steering coupler looks like it may have been replaced. Actually, I can't tell. The control arm bushings are not supposed to be installed using grease. It looks like maybe that's the case on these. Hard to say for sure. It could just be some residue of something else they used. You can see it right there on there. We'll worry about that at a later date. The Gibo's been replaced. It was installed incorrectly. Let's see if we can get it to show up there. There's an arrow, and you can just see that the arrow is supposed to point towards the flange, and in this case it is pointed away from the flange. The Gibo needs to be turned one bolt hole around. Up inside there, let's see if we can get you in there to see. Just barely at the very top there, the boot for the shifter is not correctly installed onto the shifter arm. It's not the end of the world, but if we're going to fix this Gibo, maybe we'll address that at the same time. Looks like the CV shaft is potentially, or the CV joint on the back of the drive shaft has potentially been replaced. Those are aftermarket bolts that sometimes come with the aftermarket drive shafts. Looks like maybe the subframe bolts, or excuse me, the subframe bushing for the differential have been replaced, as we can see that the bolts are marked. But they do look like they may be fresh. The rear bushing has been replaced. It looks relatively fresh. It does not have a rear sway bar on it. Yes, it does not have a rear sway bar. And we might have a crack in the RACP. We're going to clean that off and we'll come back to it. But we can see that there's a line right there, which is usually indicative of there being a crack. And then when we look over here, right up there by the shock, there's a dark spot. That's probably a pop spot weld. The rear shocks are installed backwards. It's not really a big deal, but this washer should be on the outside, so they just need to be unbolted and swapped around. It's using stock shock mounts, which we like to change up when we like to use a top mount shock mount instead of these bottom mounts. So what we would do is we would remove these. If we use these actual mounts, we would knock the pressed in studs, install a bracket with a stud from the top side, and then we would run a nut on the bottom side. That way the shocks, if they ever need to be serviced, they can be removed without disassembling the rear suspension. Excuse me, the rear interior. There's a mark on the CV shaft, but it doesn't look like it's actually touching the control arm. It looks like maybe it was from something else. Lower control arm looks like it's been replaced. Same with this side. It looks like actually they are installed upside down. This should be pointed downward, or this should be on the bottom side, as evidenced by it contacting the control arm, or the subframe right there. So it looks like these guys are installed backwards. We do have the bracket for the sway bar end link installed here, but no end link, no sway bar. It has trailing arm bushing limiters on stock bushings, and this one looks like it may be tore up. It's hard to see in the video here, but I think we're probably going to find out the bushing's bad on that one. I'm personally not a fan of using limiters on E46s, as it restricts the movement and then in turn transfers that movement into the body and tries to work that bracket out of the body, which is already a concern with these cars. Looks like the lower bushing has been replaced, the upper ball joint's been replaced. Same with the driver's side. This probably still has the 325 rear brakes, is what I'm gonna guess, or the subframe. No, I take that back. This has been all swapped over, so this has got 330 rear suspension on it, so it's 330 rear brakes on it. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and clean off the subframe, and then we'll come back and we'll look at the, I'll clean off the rear axle carrier panel, what everybody calls the subframe, and we'll come back and we'll look at that. Alright, so we're back. There is definitely a crack in the rear axle carrier panel, rear subframe, whatever you want to call it, but it's technically the rear axle carrier panel. There is a crack there. There's not really one in the right front corner, which is interesting. You usually see the right front corner crack before the left rear corner like this. And to be honest, usually don't see them a lot on Tourings, but this is an early pre-LCI, so it's a 2001 Touring, and maybe that's what it is. If this was a very early production, the first couple of months of 2000 model productions, we do see those crack a lot more, but generally after June of 2000 production, we don't really see these cars crack a lot. And this car was originally an automatic car, so that's also interesting to see that. But going from there, that's going to have to be addressed, and we got lots of options for that, and we kind of tailor those to each individual's needs. But that's pretty much the car. I don't really see anything else that's grabbing my attention, and we'll decide what we're going to do to get this thing sorted out.